The first time I saw the cabin, it felt like stumbling into another century. A veil of mist clung to the forest, softening the shapes of the trees, and through that pale haze stood the forgotten structure, a weather-beaten log house with its roof sagging in the middle, ivy crawling up the stone chimney, and a porch that looked ready to surrender to gravity. Still, something about it called to me. I had spent years flipping suburban homes for profit, but nothing had ever stirred me quite like this crumbling relic at the edge of Pinebrook Lake. When the realtor hesitated to even show it, no electricity, no plumbing, probably condemned, she'd warned, I insisted. The moment I stepped onto the porch, the wood creaked under my boots, and a cold, damp breeze swept through the gaps in the door frame. Yet the air carried a faint scent of pine and time-worn earth, like the whisper of a story waiting to be retold. Inside, the place was nearly skeletal, half-rotted beams, broken glass scattered across warped floorboards, a nest of leaves in what once was a fireplace. Sunlight poured through the cracks, catching dust motes that floated like ghosts of the people who might have lived there 150 years ago. On one wall, initials were carved deep into the timber, E&L 1873. I ran my hand across the letters and wondered who they'd been. The property had been on the market for nearly 2 years, unwanted and unclaimed. The locals said it was bad luck land. Someone's grandmother had died there. Someone else said it belonged to a family that vanished during the Great Depression. To me, that only made it more magnetic. The listing price was laughably low. I put in an offer the same day. Environmental disturbance. Another demanded I cease illegal occupation. Then came one with Karen's handwritten note at the bottom. You're destroying what doesn't belong to you. The words made my stomach tighten. A town with two faces. When I went into town for supplies, the reaction was mixed. At the cafe, a waitress named Lila served me coffee with a nervous smile. You're the guy fixing up the old Langley place, right? She asked. Karen's been talking about you nonstop. Says you're trespassing on ancestral land. I chuckled. I legally bought it. I know, she whispered, leaning closer. But around here, the HOA might as well be the law. Be careful. People don't cross Karen. Across the street, though, an older woman overheard and came up to me afterward. Don't let her scare you, she said. That cabin was built before Pinebrook even existed. My grandfather said the Langleys were good people, they worked the land fair and square. Karen's family just rewrote the story. The woman's eyes gleamed. You keep going. That house deserves to live again. That moment cemented my resolve. I wasn't just fixing a house anymore. I was rescuing a truth buried under decades of HOA propaganda. Hidden history. One morning, as I pried away the boards of an old closet, I found a hidden panel in the wall. Behind it was a small recess, and inside, a folded piece of parchment. It was a land deed, dated 1873, signed by Elias Langley, the same initials I'd seen carved in the wall. The document stated that the cabin and surrounding acreage were purchased outright from the Pinebrook Township founders. And there, faintly visible in old ink, was another name, Wells, listed under witnesses. I realized then, Karen's great-grandfather hadn't owned the land. He'd witnessed the sale, possibly even brokered it. The Wells family had twisted history to claim ownership later. This was proof. I carefully wrapped the deed and locked it in my toolbox. Karen strikes again. By the third week, Karen had escalated her campaign. She began parking her SUV at the edge of my property, snapping photos with her phone. I'd hear her muttering to herself, or maybe recording videos for the HOA board. One afternoon, I caught her trespassing outright, pacing behind the cabin with a clipboard. Can I help you? I asked, stepping outside. She turned sharply, fake smile plastered on. Just inspecting the environmental perimeter. We can't have invasive species spreading. Invasive species. I repeated, glancing at the pile of old wood. Yes. You've disturbed protected flora. I'll be reporting this. I laughed bitterly. You're unbelievable. She tilted her head, smile gone. You think you can just walk in here and erase a family's heritage? My son was supposed to inherit this property. Your son can inherit a different fantasy, I said quietly. This one's real, and it's mine now. Her expression darkened. You'll regret this. The next morning began deceptively calm. Sunlight poured through the window panes, the smell of sawdust lingered in the air, and the forest beyond the porch looked almost peaceful. I made coffee and stepped outside, breathing in the quiet. For the first time, I thought maybe things had cooled down. Maybe Karen had finally decided to let it go. I was wrong. By noon, I heard the rumble of multiple cars. 3 SUVs pulled up to my gate, each with the Pinebrook Heights HOA logo stenciled on the door. Karen emerged first, dressed in a crisp white blouse and oversized sunglasses, clipboard in hand like a general preparing for war. Behind her came 2 board members, Mr. Denton, the treasurer, and a woman I'd never met, both with smug expressions. Karen pointed toward the cabin as though presenting evidence. This is it, she announced. The unauthorized renovation, the environmental hazard, the eyesore of Pinebrook. I walked down the porch steps slowly, mug in hand. Morning, Karen. To what do I owe the pleasure? This is an official inspection, she said coldly. Your property is under review for multiple violations. Violations? I repeated. You can't just. I can, she interrupted, flashing a paper. The HOA bylaws give us the right to investigate any property that may lower the community's aesthetic or historical value. I stared at her, then at the paper. You do realize this cabin predates your entire HOA by about a century, right? Her lips tightened. All the more reason to protect its heritage. Protect it? I laughed. You vandalized it 2 nights ago. The board members shifted uneasily. Karen shot me a warning glare. Be careful with your accusations. I took a step closer. I've got proof. The original land deed. Photographs. And if you push this, I'll make it public. For the first time, I saw something flicker behind her composure, fear, maybe, or anger too raw to hide. She turned to her board members. Take pictures, she snapped. We'll see how long he lasts once we file the formal complaint. They began snapping photos of everything, the porch, the roof, even my tools. I felt my blood boiling. You're trespassing, I said through clenched teeth. Get off my property before I call the sheriff. Karen smirked. Go ahead. He's on our side. Public humiliation. By that evening, the HOA had posted about me on their official Facebook page. Be advised, an unregistered individual is performing unsafe and unauthorized work on historical land within Pinebrook Heights. Residents are advised to report any suspicious activity. They didn't use my name, but everyone knew who it meant. My phone buzzed non-stop, locals texting to warn me, others just gossiping. The next day, while loading lumber, a neighbor drove by and shouted, "You should have left when you had the chance." Even at the cafe, the whispers followed me. Lila was the only one who didn't flinch when I walked in. She slid me a coffee and whispered, "She's holding a town meeting tonight. She's trying to get you evicted." Evicted from my own property? I said. Is that even possible? Lila shrugged. With Karen, anything's possible. The town meeting. I went. Not to argue, but to see who was really behind her. The community center was packed. Karen stood at the front, hair immaculate, speaking into a microphone with the authority of a small-town queen. Behind her was a slideshow of my cabin, photos she'd taken, all carefully framed to make it look dangerous and derelict. This individual, she declared, is endangering our neighborhood with unapproved construction, possible toxic waste, and disturbance of historical property tied to the Wells family line. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I waited until she paused for dramatic effect, then stood up. That's enough, I said, walking toward the front. The room fell silent. Karen's smile vanished. You're not on the agenda, sir. I don't need to be, I replied, holding up a folder. You've been spreading lies about me, and I can prove it. I opened the folder and held up the deed. This is the original ownership document from 1873. It names Elias Langley as the rightful owner of the land, not the Wells family. Your great-grandfather wasn't the owner, he was a witness to the sale. Meaning this cabin never belonged to you. A murmur ran through the crowd. Karen's face went pale. That document is forged, she said quickly. It's not, I countered. The county archives verified it this morning. The treasurer, Mr. Denton, leaned toward her. Is that true? She didn't answer. I turned to the crowd. I've spent weeks restoring this cabin, not destroying it. You all drive by and see progress, not decay. Karen just doesn't like that she can't control it, or me. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Lila stood from the back and said loudly, "He's telling the truth. I've been there. He's doing something beautiful with that place." Others began nodding, murmuring agreement. Karen slammed the microphone down. "This meeting is over." She stormed out, her heels clicking like gunshots against the tile. The breaking point. For a few days, things were quiet again. No notes, no vandalism, no SUV parked outside. I almost believed it was over. Until the night the fire alarms went off. I woke to the smell of smoke, not from inside the cabin, but from the shed out back. I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. Flames were already licking at the wooden walls, crackling angrily in the darkness. I called 911 and grabbed the nearest bucket, throwing water until the firefighters arrived. The shed was destroyed, but thankfully, the cabin was untouched. The fire chief took my statement, nodding grimly. "You're lucky we got here fast. Any idea who'd do this?" I hesitated, then said softly, "Yeah, I've got an idea." Confrontation in the woods. The next morning, I followed the trail of footprints that led from the ashes of the shed into the woods. They were small, size 8, maybe, and stopped at a clearing near the creek. There, sitting on a fallen log, was Karen. She didn't look surprised to see me. "I told you to leave," she said quietly. "You tried to burn my property," I snapped. Her eyes were wild now, glinting with something close to desperation. "You don't understand. That cabin is ours. It was stolen from my family generations ago. They swore it would return one day." "Stolen? I have proof it was bought legally." She shook her head violently. "Paper lies. Blood doesn't." She stood, trembling. "My son was supposed to have this place. It was his right. You think you can walk in here and rewrite our story?" Her voice cracked. For a moment, I almost felt pity, until she hissed, "You don't belong here. None of you do." The sheriff arrived before I could respond. Lila had called them after I left. Karen was taken away for questioning, screaming all the while. "That's my son's inheritance. You'll pay for this." Her voice echoed through the woods long after the car disappeared down the road. The fallout. That night, I sat on the porch, staring at the charred remains of the shed. I felt drained, angry, yes, but mostly sad. Sad that something as small as an old cabin could dig up so much bitterness, so many lies buried under pride. The sheriff called later to tell me they'd found accelerant traces matching containers in Karen's garage. She'd be charged with arson and harassment. I didn't feel victorious. Just exhausted. Still, when I looked at the cabin, standing tall against the moonlight, I knew I couldn't give up now. The days that followed were heavy with silence. The woods, once filled with the sound of hammers and saws, now felt too still, as if the forest itself was waiting to see how the story would end. Karen's arrest spread quickly through Pinebrook. For the first time in decades, the HOA queen had been dethroned. Her mugshot appeared briefly in the local paper under the headline, "HOA president charged with arson and property harassment." Half the town rejoiced. The other half whispered behind closed doors, pretending they hadn't supported her crusade. But I didn't celebrate. I just worked, quietly, steadily, finishing what I'd started. The truth unearthed. A week later, the sheriff stopped by while I was painting the porch railing. He was a big man with tired eyes, the kind who'd seen too much small-town drama for one lifetime. "Got something you should see," he said, handing me a thin folder. Inside were photos, old, grainy, black-and-white images that had been discovered in the Wells family archives during their investigation. One showed Elias Langley standing proudly before the cabin in the 1800s. Another showed a man beside him, a younger version of Karen's great-grandfather, Robert Wells. On the back of one photo, written in faded ink, was a note. Robert Wells promised to oversee the deed transfer. Payment received in full. The sheriff rubbed his chin. "Looks like your hunch was right. The Wells family didn't own this land. They just handled the sale." "So the story about inheritance was made up," I said quietly. "Maybe not made up," he replied. "Maybe passed down wrong. People cling to their family legends. Over time, truth turns into myth." That made sense. Generations later, Karen probably grew up believing the story as gospel, the cabin as some lost family treasure stolen by outsiders. But believing a lie doesn't make it true. The court hearing. 2 months later, we stood in county court. Karen, dressed in gray, looked smaller than I remembered, not the commanding figure who once barked HOA orders like laws. Her lawyer tried to argue diminished responsibility, blaming emotional stress and family trauma. The judge wasn't swayed. The evidence was overwhelming: photos, witness statements, the accelerant from her garage, and the documented history proving the land's true ownership. Karen was sentenced to community service and ordered to pay damages. But as she was led out, she turned once more to face me. Her voice was low, hoarse. "You think you've won," she said. "But that place will never be yours. It belongs to the past." I didn't reply. Because in a strange way, I understood. The cabin's rebirth. Spring arrived slowly that year. Snow melted into the soil, wildflowers crept across the clearing, and the lake shimmered blue under the morning sun. The cabin, once gray and skeletal, now stood proud, restored to its former beauty. The logs were sealed, the windows clear, the porch wide and welcoming. I'd kept much of the original charm: the stone fireplace, the carved initials E and L 1873, even the photo of Elias and Eleanor Langley, now framed and hung above the mantel. Sometimes, when the wind blew through the pines, the house seemed to breathe again, alive, grateful. Lila often stopped by with groceries or stories from town. One evening, as we sat by the fire, she said, "You've changed this place. You gave it its soul back." I smiled. "I think it gave something back to me, too." She looked at the photo on the wall. "You ever wonder what they'd think, seeing it like this?" "Every day," I said. "But I think they'd be proud." An unexpected visitor. One afternoon in early summer, a car pulled into the drive. A man stepped out, mid-30s, brown hair, uncertain eyes. "Can I help you?" I asked. He hesitated. "You don't know me. I'm Daniel Wells, Karen's son." The name hit me like a ghost from the past. He held up his hands quickly. "I'm not here to fight. I just wanted to see the place." I studied him carefully. "You can look around." He walked slowly up the porch steps, running his hand along the railing. "My mom used to tell stories about this cabin. She said her great-grandfather built it for our family, and one day, I'd inherit it." I nodded. "That's what she believed." He sighed. "I found the same photos you did. The truth's different. It's hard watching her fall apart over something that was never really ours." I could hear the regret in his voice, the kind that comes when inherited pride turns into inherited pain. "I'm sorry for what happened," he added softly. "She lost herself in that story." "I know," I said. "We all lose ourselves in something." He smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "You've done a good job. It looks right." As he turned to leave, he paused. "If you ever need help keeping it up, painting, repairs, anything, I'd be honored. Maybe that's how I make peace with it." I extended my hand. "Deal." For the first time, the Wells and Langley legacies didn't feel like enemies. Just two threads of the same long, tangled history finally woven together again. The legacy restored. That night, I sat by the window, lantern burning softly beside me. The forest outside glowed under a full moon, silver light spilling across the lake. I thought about everyone who had touched this place: Elias and Eleanor Langley, Robert Wells, Karen, Daniel, and now me. Each had left a mark, some out of love, others out of fear or obsession. But that was history's nature, messy, layered, full of people doing what they thought was right. I picked up my journal and wrote a single line. Some inherit land. Others inherit the burden of remembering it. The cabin creaked gently as if agreeing. Epilogue. Months later, Pinebrook Heights elected a new HOA president, Lila. Her first act was to remove the boundary that included my property, officially freeing the cabin from HOA jurisdiction. When she told me, I laughed. Guess I'm finally off the grid. You earned it, she said. Besides, history belongs to those who respect it. That summer, we hosted an open house event. Locals came to see the restored cabin, children running on the grass, old-timers reminiscing about the Langley stories their grandparents once told. Even the sheriff showed up, shaking his head. Never thought I'd see this place alive again. As the sun dipped low, I looked around and realized something unexpected. The cabin wasn't just mine. It was everyone's now. A living memory that refused to fade. And when the last guests left, I stood alone on the porch, lantern in hand, the same way I had on the very first night. Only this time, there were no angry voices in the dark. Just peace. And the quiet, timeless heartbeat of a 150-year-old home that had finally found its way back to life.